They said no one could own private land inside the HOA, but they were wrong, and I had the deed to prove it. By the time they finished building 50 luxury cabins on my island, I was already preparing their rent invoices. Yes, the HOA really built 50 cabins on my private island, without permission, without permits, and without realizing who they were stealing from. Most people think HOA disputes are about fences or paint colors. Mine was about land, 6 acres of lakefront soil my grandfather bought after the war. He called it Cedar Isle, a patch of wilderness where he taught me how to fish, chop wood, and keep my word. When he passed, the land came to me. I didn't change a thing. Same old dock, same pine cabin, same chipped red rowboat tied to the post. That island was more than property. It was a promise, something pure that had survived long after the world around it became crowded and loud. Across the water, though, everything was changing. A new development had grown on the mainland. Trimmed lawns, mailbox clusters, and people who believed owning a home made them the sheriff of the neighborhood. They called it the Lakeside HOA. At first, they were just dots of light across the lake at night. Then the sound of power tools started echoing across the water. That's when I met her, Karen, president of the HOA. Perfect posture, clipboard in hand, and a voice like a warning siren. The first time she approached me, I was unloading supplies from my boat. She waved from the dock, her tone sharp but polite in that condescending way people use when they think they outrank you. "Excuse me?" she said. "You can't build or modify structures within the lake's shared perimeter without HOA approval." I set the crate down. "This isn't the shared perimeter," I said. "It's my island," she tilted her head. "The lake's within our management zone. That includes any connected landforms." I could have laughed. "You mean the land that's been in my family since before your neighborhood even existed?" She gave a tight smile. "We'll review the records. But until then, please refrain from unauthorized use." That was the first time I realized what I was dealing with. People who believed repetition could rewrite reality. Weeks passed. I saw more HOA trucks parked near the shoreline. Men in reflective vests started taking measurements with tripods. Then barges appeared, heavy equipment loaded onto flat platforms crossing the lake like ants hauling scraps. At first, I thought they were repairing something on their side. But one morning I woke to the rumble of engines on my island. I stepped outside and nearly dropped my coffee. Excavators, concrete mixers, and a crew of construction workers unloading lumber. "What are you doing here?" I shouted. The foreman barely looked up. "Phase 1 of the Lakeside Cabins project," he said, checking his clipboard. "You the site owner?" "I'm the landowner," I said. "You're trespassing," he frowned, flipping through his pages. "We've got HOA approval." "Permits and everything?" "Permits for what property?" I asked. He pointed toward the shore. "Lot 42. Says here it covers the Lakeside expansion zone." My island wasn't even on that map. That night, I drove to the HOA office, still muddy from the shore. Karen was in the meeting room, surrounded by her board. When she saw me, she sighed like she'd been expecting a nuisance. "You can't just take over private property," I said. "You're building on my land. Our environmental consultant determined that the lake's ecosystem, including the island, falls under community zoning," she said smoothly. "That means it's not technically private." I handed her a copy of my deed, the original survey, and my grandfather's title transfer. "That's not what the county says." She barely glanced at it. "Then feel free to file an appeal with our committee." I realized then that arguing was useless. You can't convince someone who treats arrogance as authority. So I stopped trying. I watched from my porch as they built roads, cleared trees, and poured foundations. I didn't interrupt, not once. I took photos, videos, every truck, every worker, every invoice pinned to the project sign. Month after month, the cabins rose like mushrooms after rain, 50 in total, each with its own deck and lake view. They built docks, picnic areas, even a welcome sign. Lakeview HOA Cabins, Community Retreat. Karen loved to flaunt it. Every weekend she'd host tours, waving at me across the lake like she'd conquered something. "You should thank us," she'd shout once. "We're raising your property value." I smiled back. "Oh, I'll thank you," I said quietly. "Just wait." By the 9th month, the cabins were complete. Every nail hammered, every sign polished. HOA newsletters bragged about Phase 1 completion. Homeowners donated extra fees to fund Phase 2. That's when I made my move. I invited my attorney to the island. We spent the whole morning documenting everything. Photos, GPS coordinates, footage from my drone, and all legal references from the county registry. When we finished, he grinned. "You've got them." A week later, a courier delivered a thick envelope to the HOA office. Inside, a formal cease and desist, a full list of property encroachments, and a demand for either immediate removal of all structures or compensation for land usage. Karen called me that evening, voice trembling behind forced confidence. "What is this? You're threatening the community?" "No," I said calmly. "I'm protecting what's mine." She tried to laugh. "Our legal team will handle it." "Good," I said. "Tell them to bring the checkbook." The silence on the line lasted 3 seconds, just long enough for me to hear the panic crack her composure. And that's when I knew. The tide was turning. For 2 weeks. I tried to get someone, anyone, to listen. The local council tossed me between departments. The zoning office said, "It's private development. Talk to the HOA." The HOA's email auto-replied, "We'll get back to you within 90 business days." By the time 90 hours had passed, I realized they weren't just ignoring me. They were counting on me to give up, so I flew back to my island. From the air, it looked like a disease had spread across it. Wooden skeletons, metal roofs, bulldozers chewing through pine trees. When I landed, a man in a neon vest walked up like he owned the place. "Sir, you can't be here. This is an active construction site," I laughed. "Yeah?" "Funny because it's my construction site." He frowned and flipped through a clipboard. "You must be mistaken. These parcels belong to Seabreeze Shores HOA. They've been approved for Phase 2 residential development." I pulled out my deed, laminated, notarized, older than this man's career. "This says otherwise." He looked at it, then at me. "You'll have to take that up with our legal department." That was the moment I realized this wasn't some innocent paperwork error. They had drawn up blueprints for an entire island that wasn't theirs. Utilities, docks, even a private beach zone. They were selling my land before they'd even asked who owned it. That night, I stayed in the small cabin my father built. It sat half buried under scaffolding now, like a relic from another time. I looked out at the floodlights blazing through the trees and thought, if they can steal it, I can charge them for it. I wasn't going to bulldoze them. I was going to make them pay rent. Every last one of them. But first, I needed proof. I needed to make sure this entire Seabreeze Shores project was built on a lie, and that meant sneaking into their construction records before they could bury them, under permits and signatures, because once I had evidence, the real game would begin. The next morning, I crossed the bay to the mainland with a fake contractor badge and a hard hat I borrowed from one of their trucks. I wasn't breaking in, and not technically. I was just visiting a site office that happened to be built on my property. Inside the trailer, everything smelled like printer ink and entitlement. Maps lined the walls, satellite layouts of my island, divided neatly into 50 numbered plots. Each plot had already been marked, sold pending final payment. They weren't planning to steal my land. They had already sold it. I opened a folder labeled Permit Coordination. Inside, I found a digital blueprint file stamped with county approval. But something felt off. The parcel number on their paperwork didn't match mine. They had copied the wrong coordinates. In short, they'd filed permits for land adjacent to my island, then moved construction 1 mile east. By the time anyone noticed, it would all be finished and too late to undo. Classic HOA strategy: overwhelm with paperwork, confuse with jargon, and act faster than anyone can object. I copied everything: plans, emails, payment records, onto a USB drive and left quietly. Back in my cabin, I spread the papers across the table like puzzle pieces. It was all there: proof of fraud, forged approval letters, and fake signatures from people who'd been dead for years. I called the HOA president, a woman named Marjorie Trent. Her voice carried that syrupy tone people use when they think they're smarter than you. "Mr. Cole, this is a misunderstanding. Our developers were under the impression your island was under county redevelopment rights. It's all being handled legally, I said. Legally? You're squatting on private land. You're about to sell 50 properties that don't exist on paper, she chuckled softly. Then take us to court, if you can afford it. Click. That call told me everything. She didn't see me as a threat. She thought I was just another angry landowner shouting into the wind, but I wasn't planning to fight her in court. I was going to fight her on paper, her own battlefield. Because the moment those cabins went up, and people started living there, they'd need utilities, water, electricity, internet. And all of it ran through my private infrastructure license. They'd built themselves a perfect prison, and I was the landlord. For weeks, I said nothing. I watched from the bluff as their cabins multiplied, one after another. Neat little boxes lined along the shore, all painted identical shades of beige arrogance. From my telescope, I could see the workers stringing power cables, connecting water lines, even hauling internet fiber across the shallow causeway. Every single pipe, every cable, ran through a 3-foot stretch of conduit that touched my original property line. That stretch, it was mine, legally and exclusively. They were building a resort on my island, and every ounce of power flowing through it would have to pass through me. It wasn't revenge yet, it was leverage. I called a friend from college, Mason, an environmental law consultant who owed me more than a few favors. We met in a diner just off the mainland pier. He looked over the documents I'd taken, flipping through them with raised eyebrows. "Cole, this is fraud on 6 different levels," he muttered. They forged signatures from the county assessor's office. "That's felony territory. I don't want to press charges yet," I said. "I want to make them pay rent." He blinked. "Rent? You want to become their landlord?" I smiled. "Exactly. We drafted a proposal, clean and airtight, a retroactive land access agreement. It stated that any structure, road, or line crossing my coordinates was subject to a monthly lease. Not just for land, for utility passage, environmental impact, and shore access. Basically, every nail they'd driven came with a price tag. By the time Mason was done, the document looked so official it could have come from the governor's office. The next step was delivery. I waited for the perfect moment, their grand opening weekend. The HOA was hosting a ribbon-cutting ceremony, complete with champagne, camera crews, and a few politicians smiling for photos. They'd called it the Emerald Shores Project. I called it the island they stole. I arrived by boat in a windbreaker and sunglasses, unnoticed at first. Then one of the board members spotted me and whispered something to Marjorie Trent. Her face froze, just slightly. "Mr. Cole," she said, approaching with that fake warmth. "Nice of you to visit. Care to see what progress looks like when done right?" I handed her a thick envelope. "Progress comes with a price." "That's your new lease agreement," she frowned. "Lease?" 50 cabins. "Utility lines. Road access. Each one occupies my coordinates. That means you owe me rent, effective immediately." People were staring now. Cameras turned. The mayor's smile wavered. She laughed nervously. "You can't be serious. You have no jurisdiction." "Actually," I interrupted, Section 12B of the county zoning map shows all this land registered under my title. You filed permits for parcel 4109A. This is parcel 4109B. Wrong island." Her smile cracked. The PR manager looked like he wanted to vanish into the sand. I walked toward the microphone they'd set up for the ribbon cutting. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said calmly, "this development has been constructed on private land without authorization. As of today, all occupants and entities are subject to a lease of $3,000 per cabin, per month. Payment is due in 30 days. The silence that followed was the kind you could taste, sharp, metallic. Then the murmurs began, reporters scribbling, cameras flashing. Marjorie hissed under her breath. "You're bluffing." I pulled out a second envelope. "Certified copy, filed with the county clerk this morning. You're standing on leased ground, Miss Trent." She stormed off, but the damage was done. Within hours, local news stations were running with headlines. HOA builds on private island, now forced to pay rent to owner. Over the next week, their lawyers called non-stop. Some threatened, some begged. I ignored most of them. Mason handled the paperwork, sending polite invoices with late payment clauses. By the end of the first month, Only 3 cabins had paid. By the second month, power began flickering across the island. I had the right to throttle utilities for non-payment. After all, when the water pumps failed one evening, I got a furious call from Marjorie. "You can't do this," she shouted. "Families are living here." "They're welcome to stay," I said. "Just pay rent. You're extorting us." I chuckled. "No, I'm a landlord collecting dues." "Isn't that what your HOA does?" The irony hit her like a brick, and she hung up. A month later, the county commissioner himself came to negotiate. We met on my dock at sunset. He was sweating before he even spoke. "Mr. Cole, this situation is escalating. The press is eating it up. The county's getting pressure from the state. We need a resolution." I handed him a revised contract, one that converted the lease payments into a buyout offer. If the HOA wanted to keep their island resort, they could buy the land outright, for 10 times what it was worth. They took it. They had no choice. The investors were bleeding money, and the lawsuits piling up from the fraudulent permits were becoming public. 2 months later, $12.4 million hit my account. I kept the cabin, of course. But the rest of the island? I leased it back to them, legally this time, with my name permanently stamped on every utility invoice. Now, every month, the same HOA that tried to erase me sends a check to my mailbox. I sometimes visit their new Emerald Shores resort on weekends. I sit at the cafe terrace, sip coffee, and watch families stroll along the boardwalk, built right where my grandfather once fished. They think it's just another luxury getaway. But every smile, every light, every drop of water they use, runs through something I own. Revenge didn't come with a hammer or a gun. It came on letterhead, printed in triplicate, signed in blue ink. And that's the beauty of it. They built their paradise on my land, and now they'll never stop paying for it.